Wednesday evening, everyone. You are watching Direct Line. Our special guest this evening is Delegate Matt Morgan from St. Mary's County, Legislative District 29A. And our hosts tonight are Mark Unkefer and Nicole Bennett. Take it away, guys.
Well, welcome to our show, and we really appreciate the opportunity to have Matt Morgan. It's one of these Maryland customs that delegates go on the road, and to senators too, but go on the road after session's over and ask questions and let people know about what happened. And I think that's really one of the great features of the state, is unlike New York or California, where the legislature just goes on and on forever. There's this period of time when you guys go back and talk to your constituents about what's going on. So tell us, what kind of questions are you getting about what happened during session?
Well, a lot of people are just asking like my personal experience in session. They're asking gun topics are a big question of concern for the state of Maryland. They're also asking like what we passed and what we didn't pass, what we stopped. So we've had an array of questions. I've probably done 5 or 6 of these wrap-up forums now, and I just want to thank you all for having me on.
So why don't we start off with guns, because that has been a topic that folks have talked about. And, we've got legislation. Well, you could probably describe it better, but let's talk about it, the constitutionality and what's going to happen in litigation and so forth. But first, explain what happened.
So Democrats, and I'm going to say the word Democrats because they did pass the bill unilaterally in reaction to the Brewer case. That really freed things up for people to protect themselves with concealed carry. Democrats' reaction to that was to pass SB 1. And just the title of that bill tells you how big of a priority it was. Mm-hmm. That bill was actually, I think, struck through and rewritten the day of the hearing, allowed very little people, a limited amount of time to prepare and testify for it. And it's something the Senate dealt with almost in the entire session. The bill crossed over and came to the House, and we dealt with it for about 4 days going into sine die. The big thing what that bill does, the biggest thing that it does is it reverses the clause. Basically, it says that you can't carry a concealed permit, even if you're a concealed permit holder, on private property unless you're expressly granted permission by that private property owner. So if you were going to like a Walmart or something like that, unless you had written permission from Walmart or they put up a sign, you wouldn't be allowed to carry a firearm in there. It creates all kinds of problems because if you're just driving down the road and you had to pull into a gas station, well, now you're on private property. So it's a de facto gun ban for the state of Maryland. And I look forward to it being overturned in a court of law.
Absolutely. So one of the other things that happened during session, Matt, that was interesting to me, especially on the heels of SB 1, was, making gun theft a felony. So that was a very interesting debate. What happened there?
Well, I mean, we still didn't pass it. The minority party's been trying to pass that legislation for about 5 years now. Mm-hmm. And look, going back in my political career, back 10 years ago, SB 1, when we banned assault weapons for the state of Maryland. And since then, we've banned long rifles, we've banned ghost guns, bump stocks. Almost every year, there is an anti-firearm bill. But still, violent crime is shooting up through the roof. Baltimore City is one of the most dangerous cities in the Western Hemisphere. It hasn't had a lot of impact, and one of the reasons why is because they keep focusing on law-abiding citizens to keep legislating their ideas, and when the policies they are pushing fails to produce the results they're promising, they keep going back to the law-abiding citizens to get the answers that they want. We had another bill this year dealing with locking your firearm up and requiring it to be locked up until the age of 18. I just don't think those laws do a lot, especially when the overwhelming problem in the state is crime and stolen firearms.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. we have so many people who are concerned with the law-abiding citizen, as you say, but we see this uptick in crime. And on a lot of the social media posts, you see a lot of people complaining about, when criminals or people who commit crime are caught, they're let go on their own recognizance, or they get an ankle bracelet. And you see this all of the time, where citizens are getting really angry at the judges, but not angry at the people who make the law. Do you have an opinion?
So look, I mean, if you look back at what the legislature has done the last 3 or 4 years, I mean, you're talking about justice reinvestment, juvenile justice reform, no cash bail bond reform, the police reform bills. All those bills have made the citizens of Maryland dramatically less safe. Mm-hmm. And people, you don't need statistics. You feel it. People are like, not going shopping at, when it's dark outside. So it's a huge problem. It's a fundamental state, local government responsibility to try to provide adequate law enforcement. And I'll tell you another thing, Nicole. Ever since I've ran for office, every election, there's always politicians that'll come in there and talk about economic development. And if you look back, if county commissioners, county executives, delegates, senators, always start talking about economic development. Well, if you look back, the track record of economic development for the state and the county is pretty poor. But the one thing that the state and the counties are uniquely qualified to do is to provide security. And this is a huge economic development piece here, because people are just simply not going to spend their money, and they're not going to invest their money where they don't feel safe. And some of these disadvantaged areas that are really going to continue to be disadvantaged because the crime is just out of control. I mean, they need to get a grip on that.
What is the rationale for not making gun theft a felony?
I don't know.
I guess
you have to bring some of my colleagues in from across the aisle, and I'm sure they'll give you something that deals with equity, or how there's already some other laws on the books that deals with it. But my understanding of that bill, and look, we've debated it plenty of times on the House floor, because not only did we submit it as a legislation, but we also submitted it, normally tack it on or try to tack it on to another bill, because we deeply believe in it, is that, a firearm, they're not that expensive. They're under $1,500. So normally this is when someone's charged with it, there is no designation in the law of theft of a firearm. It's theft of an object under $1,500, which is a misdemeanor, and normally plea bargained out at court. So, I mean, look, if someone's stealing a firearm, there's no good guy in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Agreed. So one of the things that I love so much about you, Delegate Morgan, aside from the great campaign stuff that you hand out, shameless plug for Matt Morgan for delegate, right?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Always, right? There was maybe a couple of times this session where you gave passionate remarks. You, Lauren Arikan, Delegate Grammer, Kathy Shalega, when you guys get on the microphone and you're standing up and you're speaking truth to power.
Well, look, up in Annapolis, the only thing you're really guaranteed, is your voice and your vote. Mm-hmm. That's it. And look, a lot of times that's the only thing that you can have as a tool to negotiate. I seem like, my real job, I'm a realtor, and I've seen like 3 different techniques of negotiation up in Annapolis. You have, predominantly by Republicans. You have, we'll call it grovel and beg. Mm-hmm. And look, that'll give you a couple little trinkets, maybe back home, pass your bond bill or something like that. But the problem with groveling and begging is, they keep upping the threshold for what you have to jump across. And sooner or later, next thing you know, you're doing stuff that I promise you, your constituents don't like.
Yeah.
We'll call option B or 2 here. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. And look, that's completely legitimate if you want to try to do this. So, I'll give you a vote here, and then you get me back some other time. I mean, a lot of people view that's how politics is really done. But the problem is with the Democrats having a 32-seat mandate in the House, that very rarely ever comes up because they just have such a huge mandate. There's nothing really they can't pass without, their parties just doing it on their own, completely unilaterally. Comes up in the Senate sometimes, dealing committees over there. We'll go option C. It's much more of a confrontational model. See, you're going to pass what you want to pass, but then I'm going to reframe it, and I'm going to tell everybody what you're doing about it, or not doing about it. And sometimes that confrontational model doesn't win you a lot of friends. But, I mean, when it's the only tool that you're left with, I think a lot of people want that in their politician. They just want somebody to tell them the truth of what's going on and what's the cumulative effects of it. And that has led to some pretty passionate floor speeches because, look, it's necessary. And that's our way of informing our constituents that, they're not alone. You're not crazy.
Now this is going into your third term now. And so you've seen the transition that's taken place over the years. And
it's been a huge transition. So let me give you an example of that. I'm one of the most conservative legislators in the state of Maryland. If you look at the ACU ratings that come out, I'm constantly in the high 80s, 90% column. So I'm like a gold star rated conservative. And I haven't changed a bit, since day one. I've been very consistent. The first 2 years that I was in the legislature, I casted a total of 5 votes against my committee chairman. And look, the committee chairman has turned over a couple times. I'm on the Health and Government Operation Committee. It's a great committee. I like it because, Democrats and Republicans, everyone gets sick. So, healthcare shouldn't be that partisan. But look, some of the stuff that comes through is still pretty partisan. And the Democrats have moved so far left, and it's just becoming more and more partisan. I mean, I cast 5 negative votes or 5 no votes against my committee chairman. It's like a normal voting session now. So.
We watch that. A lot of us political types watch session when it's in session. And
thank you.
I work in healthcare exec here. I get the craziest messages from my friends like, your boy's at it. Get your TVs on. So all the TVs in my practices, are watching because I think it's important that people pay attention to what their legislators are doing. It's epic. Even people who are not conservative people really understand what you're saying, that you're fighting for what you believe in, and it's not mean-spirited, and it's not hateful, and it's not divisive. It's just a different point of view, and you're making your voice heard. And although you may not win many friends there, you're winning friends all around the state.
And right. And that's where it matters. I didn't go to Annapolis to be the most popular guy or the most likable guy. I went up there to represent my area and do what I think is right by them. Sure. And look, the people that are calling you divisive, and look, I've been called horrible names. I mean, just about an hour ago, I was threatened to be sued by somebody online, and I was called a terrorist. So I'm certainly not a terrorist. I don't think I'm a mean guy. And sometimes those exchanges get heated back and forth. But literally, when I stand up to speak on the microphone in the House floor, I'm trying to convey our point of view. And it might be different than theirs. The interesting thing is, we all used to have the same, we all used to strive for the same outcome. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we want, less crime. We want better schools. We want higher quality of life and more efficient government. And we just had arguments about how to get there. Now it seems like we're arguing about stuff that's so out in left field and off the reservation. Like we had the transgender bill come through. I think it was HB 283. And that the bill was debated for 4 days in the House of Delegates. We've tried to amend it, tried to amend the Senate bill. And literally, where would the commonality be on a bill like that? You're talking about, I mean, in my opinion, child mutilation. And look, we've had, and for those who are not familiar with that bill, what it is gender affirming care. And it's not affirming anyone's gender, it's affirming their dysphoria.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that we're not caring. The reason why we're articulating this is we are caring and we're using data. You know, the data report that we kept talking about was a recent study that, 81% of kids with counseling would go back to the gender that they were assigned at birth, unless you introduce puberty blockers or surgery. And so, we're sitting here questioning this in committee. And you have doctors on the witness panel saying, well, I would prescribe this to a child as young as 9.
No way.
Like, well, let me ask you, what drugs would you prescribe? And you said, well, I prescribe Lupron. Well, Lupron is a drug that's designed for men with prostate cancer.
Shrinks tumors, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And off-label use is for transgender. The other off-label use is for chemical castration.
Mm-hmm.
So you're giving this to a 9-year-old. This is life-changing impacts, and you're forcing this child into a segment of the population that has, literally a suicide rate 9 times higher than the general population. And so we're coming from it from that angle, that this caring is not bigoted or it's not homophobic.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people on the left try to shout you down as that. And look, that's just a debate technique to try to shut you up.
For sure.
They don't like what you're saying.
For sure.
Would you put your finger on what has been talked about? First of all, obviously the issues are no longer where we agree on what the objective is, but we are talking about completely different objectives. But then the other piece of that is that if there is a debate, that there is this sense that there is no acceptable alternative point of view, and that you get shut down and there can't be any further discussion. And so you no longer agree on what the topic is, and B, if there is debate, it's illegitimate. It's a completely different dynamic than I think even a decade ago.
It's a different dynamic than when I was in the legislature at the very beginning. And look, it's not so much on the floor that we're dealing with this censorship, because there's rules that the minority party has, and we can speak on the floor pretty freely. But as far as the activists and out in the community, I mean, you have activists out there threatening people left and right, saying, at least on my Facebook page, they come on there and say, well, if you're saying this, I'm going to cut videos. I'm going to go to your employer. I'm going to get you in trouble and get you fired. Mm-hmm. And look, when you're threatening people's livelihood, but when did we condone that as a society? You know, I mean, you wouldn't condone that if someone was being physically attacked, if you're coming out of a restaurant or a bar. So why are we putting it up with that just in the general society is beyond me. And it's really something that needs to get straightened up, and people just shouldn't tolerate it.
Agreed. I'm sorry.
I was going to say one of the topics that we've been sort of talking about for a number of years has been the Kerwin. I know they don't talk about Kerwin quite so much and talk about it as the
Kerwin. I think is Irish for tax increase.
Well,
not for sure.
Kerwin, but I've noticed a change in the rhetoric. It's now the blueprint, right? But this has been obviously a slow moving or fast moving, perhaps, but a moving fiscal train wreck for the state. Now, we talked about the prospect for taxes down the road, but this year, I mean, this is taking a long time to implement, and each time it's like the frog in the boiling water. It's slowly ratcheted up. So where are we this year as a result of what they've been
So the
doing?
state made its obligation funding, and that's really what Kerwin is. It's a funding mechanism. All the good stuff that was supposed to be happening with Kerwin, as far as the policies being implemented into schools, I think it's been done. And look, the schools are more of a mess right now than they have been in any time that I can remember. COVID is a big part of that. But I look at the Kerwin legislation, and you tell me what's in the legislation that's going to fix some of the behavioral problems that we're having in the school system. It's not there.
Nothing.
When it comes down to it, the only way you're going to fix the school system is to hold people accountable and really trusting in parents to make better decisions for their children. That's why I've been always a strong advocate of school choice. I think that is the way to go forward. That is the 21st century way of looking at education. What we've been doing, with Kerwin is the same, tired old problem that we've been using. Same logic that created the problem will never fix the problems. The Einstein quote. I think that's where Kerwin is.
Now, we spent an extraordinary amount of time, when you think about the $40+ billion total budget, on the $1 to $2 million in the Boost program.
So the total budget's $62 billion.
Right.
And we spent a tremendous amount of time trying to restore Boost. An interesting thing about Boost is $9 million. It's a school choice program for mostly disadvantaged children.
Sure.
In Democratic areas, like Baltimore City.
Mm-hmm.
So I just find it ironic that, if you read Wes Moore's book, I mean, obviously education was really important to him. He said that, going to the private schools that he went to was a way that he was able to excel in his life. I just wish he would give other children the same opportunity he had.
It's actually, as astonishing as that is, and we could go on. The leader in the Senate, Ferguson, went to Georgetown Prep, which is pretty pricey. So private schools, independent.
Well, look, maybe somebody should do a study. You're kind of quasi-journalist. It would be nice if you went through the General Assembly and looked at all 47 senators and 141 delegates and find out how many of them actually sent their children to public schools. Mm-hmm. That would be much more accurate of telling than where somebody else went maybe 20 or 30 years ago. How many people that, set the public policy actually use the public policy? And I'm happy to say that my daughter graduates a public high school this year. Mm-hmm. And her experience was good in some situations and bad in the others, and it could have been improved. But I would also say that I think the school system in the areas that I represent is considerably better than some of the other parts of the state.
But you're talking about what they do as parents. That one of the fascinating things about Wes Moore is when he was head of the Robin Hood Foundation, one of their activities was providing charter schools. So,
well, his first acting governor there, ran on a platform and leaving no one behind. They made a substantial, I guess he made some cuts to Boost. The House made some further cuts to Boost. And then the Senate ended up putting that money back in. I think they settled on $9 million. It was $10 million, so they got $1 million there. And the important part is they were trying to phase out the program.
Right.
And look, I think people need to understand why. Why would they do that? In my opinion, this is completely politically motivated by the teachers union. Yep. Saying, you know what, we're scared of the competition. We don't want the competition, and we're going to go out of our way to eliminate it. So think about how ridiculous it is. We spend $9 billion in state dollars in education. The counties normally chump in another 50%. There's some state money that comes in there. So we're talking like $20+ billion in the state of Maryland in education. And their main concern is this one little program, $9 million is set up to help poor kids.
I remember watching that floor debate, and one of the Democrats stood up and she said, well, we're going to pay for another year, and then for the siblings of the kids who are in Boost now, and then after that, it's just going to be completely phased out. And Delegate Munoz took to the floor, and she is a wonderful woman, very soft-spoken, but don't let that small voice fool you. She's absolutely a honey badger. And she goes, well, what about the other children? Radio silence across the hall. She hit the nail right on the head. from a Black Marylander perspective, we know that there's a problem in Baltimore City. We know that children who look and sound like me have it harder in school systems where it's failing. We don't have the luxury, some parents don't have the luxury of putting their kids in private school. So having this program helps. It gives them a ticket to educational freedom that literally lifts their life circumstances and allows them to do greater and better things. Delano Squires from the Heritage Foundation actually wrote a wonderful op-ed about this particular problem coming from this particular governor. You look like us, you sound like us. What are you doing?
So think about if you're a parent in one of those school systems, Nicole, and it came out, Fox 45 has done some really good reporting. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting because reporters don't really seem to do reporting anymore. Mm-hmm. Journalism is failing. But Fox 45, Project Baltimore has done some excellent work on the school systems and their test scores. And it came out that 23 schools in Baltimore City didn't have a single child proficient in math, mm-hmm. and I believe writing as well. And then there was I think 7 in Baltimore County. And look, instead of just, if you're a parent and your kid's going to one of those schools, I mean, what is your option? I'm not, my party doesn't lock people in their zip code or discriminates people by their zip code. Right. And that's exactly what's going on in our education system. And to me, it was good to see that Republicans come out and fight for kids that are not in their areas, not in their districts, and really defend the civil rights of these children because they're entitled to get an education, a great education.
And the postscript
living up to that promise.
I was going to say, in the postscript to how that problem got, quote, unsolved, was the numbers were taken down from the website where the
you mean station, they were
and then it went back up as an asterisk. So
right.
The numbers.
The funny thing about the asterisks, as the Fox 45 has reported, and look, my little group that we have up here in Annapolis, we've written tons of letters dealing with this situation. And it's interesting the note that, Virginia, Delaware, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, their schools, they were able to document them. If you pull up their reports, they don't have asterisks next to theirs. Maryland State Department of Education should be held responsible for this. And this problem should be corrected. I mean, it really looks like a lack of transparency, and then they're trying to cover up from their failings.
So let's turn to another topic. There's a lot to digest. One of the ones is the climate initiatives, and
we're going to legislate the weather.
We're going to do the weather. We're going to fix the weather once and for all, and. Now, this has got a number of permutations to it. Specifically, was the ban coming up on gas-powered trucks to require electric trucks coming down the road. That's one piece that was done this year. Although regulatory, we've got this mandate to not sell cars, gas-powered cars, after 2035. Where do you begin with that? I mean,
well, look, on the floor, it's always interesting because we ask these really simple questions, like why, and what would the dealerships do? And you always get these long, drawn out answers that they actually, the dealerships, they actually support this legislation. When it gets down to it, Maryland is just not that big of a state. Right. And look, they're always going to have gas stations here for, I think, in the conceivable future. I mean, you have major interstates running right through our state here. I think this is just going to push people into neighboring states to buy their vehicles.
Yeah.
When it's all said and done. I don't think price controls work on situations like this, especially in light duty. Well, not even light duty. It was medium duty and heavy duty trucks. So, I mean, when have you ever seen electric truck driving a head of cattle down the road? Ever? Yeah. I haven't either. So look, it's an idea that's well before its time. They're trying to artificially push this onto the population, and I just don't think it's smart economically. And I can't see businesses buying into this at this point.
It's just going to drive up prices for the consumers, all the way around. The people who consume the products that are being dragged to us very slowly by these electric vehicles, it's just going to make Maryland that much more expensive, forcing people who are on fixed incomes further and further away from our state.
I think it leads to people moving out of the state. I was always, when I was running for office a few terms ago, people were always like, Matt, when I retire, I'm moving. When my son graduates school, I'm moving. When my parents pass away, I'm moving. Now I'm hearing, look, I'm moving because crime. I'm moving because the schools are not good. I'm just moving. And that's heartbreaking for the state. And really, if you think about it, there's no logical reason why people would want to move away from their home. Maryland is a great state with a lot of things going for it.
For sure.
They're moving away because of the politics that suck.
And it's interesting. It's interesting. The census data bears that out, which is that last year Maryland as a state had a decline, which is we've been used to.
And states just like us, like New York and California, right, also experienced the same decline. And at some point, you would hope that lawmakers would smarten up and say, "Hey, look, the people that are leaving, they're taxpayers. They're not tax takers. They're taxpayers." And you think you would start to treat those people a little bit nicer, and but that doesn't seem to be the direction that we're headed.
Does not.
So obviously, this sets up a whole discussion about economic development and what the prospects are for that. One of the other issues that in at least our part of the state we've struggled with is transportation and gridlock. And one of the initiatives that Governor Hogan had was a system of hot lanes, of high occupancy toll lanes that would be voluntary. If you wanted to do it, you could go forward with it and get a little faster, but pay more. That has been dropped by the company that Transurban that had been picked to run this, and we'd reached an agreement with, but was still in the final stages. I think they saw the handwriting on the wall and have dropped the prospect, the program. So what's interesting is now Virginia which already has around the Beltway lots and lots of hot lanes. Basically, it'll hit the American Legion Bridge. They haven't reached there yet, but that's where it's going to happen. You're going to have hot lanes in Virginia, and then it'll be, in all likelihood, a drop-off when we hit Maryland. And it's going to be, frankly, a real problem for people who have got jobs in Virginia to get across, or vice versa, to come into Maryland. And it's going to encourage a lot of companies that are in our area to relocate, if they haven't already, to Virginia.
It's going to be interesting to see how some of these states, especially like Virginia, which I would have considered a blue state a few years ago, they were putting in blue state policies, and that really shocked a lot of people over there. And now they've completely flipped around, where their House is controlled by Republicans, a Republican in the governorship. The same with the Attorney General for them, and they're making some pro-business decisions that a lot of people seem to like over there.
It's interesting
about this divergence between red states and blue states going forward until the blue states really start to,
it's interesting.
Before actually they come to their senses.
It's interesting on transportation. The Virginia Democrats tend to be kind of an all of the above. So they'll build mass transit, they'll build hot lanes, they'll build highways, they'll build, whatever. And it particularly,
I don't think the Virginia Democrats are as woke as Maryland Democrats. The majority of the talking points that I'm hearing that are cutting projects like that in your area. And look, I don't live that area.
Right.
I don't pay really close attention to it, but the problems seem to be falling under either some type of explanation for equity, whether it's, how do poor people get into these lanes, and why would we create one lane just for rich people? Well, it's not just for rich people. It's people that are trying to go to work, get to a next meeting, get home to their family. If they're willing to pay and subsidize the project and get that car out of the other lanes, then that's normally a good thing. But under today's philosophy, the political philosophy, obviously, it's holding things up.
A bill that fortunately didn't get very far was the Majority Leader Mark Corman's bill, which would have required that Transportation Authority maximize tolls, which is an interesting concept. So the idea was to put the tolls as high as possible to maximize revenues, whatever economic metric they had to be able to do that, and use that money not for the roads or the tunnels or the bridges, but to use that money essentially for mass transit. He had
WMATA.
WMATA, and
you're going
also
to subsidize everyone's everyone who doesn't pay their fare when they ride WMATA, because I mean, look, there's been numerous stories about like people jumping over the gates and skipping out on that. I want to say that WMATA lost, it was something incredible, like $40 million last year on fares that were not collected. Yeah. So look, this is just another case of not only the tolls, but the gas tax.
Yes.
That ultimately disproportionately paid by motorists, subsidizing mass transit because, well, let's face it, that they like mass transit. They run on a platform of, trains. The trains are running on time. It's like the campaign promise of 1872.
They are stuck in the past with a lot of policies, aren't they?
Yeah, it seems like that. We're going to have windmills and the trains are going to run on time.
And we're going to have smart growth, which is like houses on smaller and smaller lots, closer and closer together. It reminds us of a time 100 years ago when half the population of the state of Maryland was located in Baltimore City.
Yeah, Baltimore City is a really great example of that through bad decisions that the city has made, through bad trade agreements our federal government has made. It's really collapsed that city. Baltimore City in the 60s had 1.2 million people there. And now they're at like 590,000 or something like that. So it's really, really shrinking. And look, places like Baltimore City really should be the economic engine for the state. They're not. They actually receive more tax money than they pay in. So it's an economic boat anchor. And it's all the problems that we've discussed on the show already. It's taxes, it's crime, it's education, it's failing policies.
Can I pivot to an issue you were involved with last year, and I don't know as you were involved as much this year, but we'll find out. Was last year there was legislation that would have sent mail-in ballots to every voter, as I recall. I may be wrong, and you were very vocal about that being a bad idea. Was there much?
It's still a bad idea.
Yeah, it's still a bad idea. Let's be clear. Was there much on election law that took place this year?
There was, and there's I don't know the details of the one bill. I believe it had to deal with how you cure ballots, and if ballots weren't filled out completely, the Board of Elections could text you, and you could make the changes via text message. So look, I think a lot of these ballot concerns fall under election integrity. I think that's much greater issue than actually access to voting. Access to voting is we have early voting, we have election day, you have mail-in ballots, you have absentee ballots, and really with what's going on in Maryland right now, the Democrats kind of have the best of both worlds, which I think they have a superior advantage right now, with them going out and almost ballot harvesting for and pounding the pavement to really gin up their mail-in votes. And if you think about it, if they mailed everyone a ballot, well, that would be probably a less advantage than what they currently have, because you have a system set up right now where they go out there, beat the pavement, and they get their low propensity voters to show up and actually participate. Where, unfortunately, a lot of Republicans still sit on their hands on the gubernatorial election and don't show up to vote. And look, we're paying the price for that. When I first got to the General Assembly, my class that I was first elected, we had 50 people in the House, and things were a good bit more tolerable then. We're at 39 right now, and you can feel the difference in the committees. I'm just thinking that the state would be much more moderately ran and governed from the center if it didn't have complete control and really a super majority control by the Democratic Party in both chambers and with the governor's mansion. So, if 10 or 15 more Republicans were walking around, I think people's life might be a little bit better.
Nicole, I know you've had a lot of thoughts about, ballot harvesting or I like to say when Democrats do it, it's ballot harvesting. When Republicans do it, it's voter assistance.
Yes, the voter assistance program. Listen, I'm a big proponent of playing by the rules. One of the things that I think, and I say this as a party official, one of the things that I think that we have to do is, as we were joking earlier, leaving the early 1800s. Come on, folks, we got to get with the program. We have to. This is the rules of the game. We cannot play soccer if they're playing football. We have to go and chase these votes. And I don't want to call out any particular part of the state, the middle of our state. I don't want to call out any particular counties, but there are Republicans who get absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, and sit on them, and then sometimes forget them. And our legislature has given us this wonderful tool where enterprising people can go and assist that voter in making sure that ballot gets back to the precinct. And you can scan a QR code and track your ballot. They've given us these wonderful tools. It's about time that MDGOP starts using them. It works.
Well, absolutely. Unfortunately, the rules changed yet again. I mean, I'm not a big fan of mail-in voting or drop-box voting. To me, you should show up on election day. But with that being said, I mean, if these are the rules, then we have to figure out a way to get people that are low propensity voters to show up. And look, I mean, it depends on it. I mean, your quality of life, and people are saying, "Well, I'm moving from here." It's like, well, I know you voted, but did your children?
Right.
And a lot of times the answer is no. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, I mean, the other side got their people to vote. So,
well, Delegate, that actually raises a whole other question we could talk about another show, because my son is still registered for Maryland. He's been a resident of Colorado for a decade. We've moved twice. The registration keeps following us. And I'm waiting to see. So the last time he voted was 2000 in Maryland was 2012. He's still on the registration, but that's not, as they say, that's not all. I did a little research in my building, and I was looking for voters registered in my building who are over 100 years old. So I went and found this woman, and then I did a search. She's 100. She was born in 1920, and she hasn't voted for as long as we have records, she hasn't voted. And then I did a search on Google and found that she died in January 2003.
Yeah.
So she's been on the ballot on the rolls for 20 years. Mm-hmm. As far as I can tell, has not voted at all, but continues to do it. She died down in Florida, so the records didn't match up. But for Democrats worried about primaries, they should be scared to death because there's a real opportunity in low vote primaries. And she's a Democrat. I mean, not that I mean, that is what it is. In low vote elections, they should be scared to death that somebody starts getting a hold of a whole bunch of these ballots and runs one of them out of office.
Absolutely. They should. I don't know why they are not. And look, this goes back to election integrity. And you want people to have confidence in the system. Absolutely. And this is the reason why we had so many peaceful transfers of power in this country, is because when people don't like how the direction the government's going in, whether it's your county, state, or federal government, they know that in 2 years they can walk into the voting booth and cast a vote and change the direction that the country's headed in. But when you start having stories like this, and bloated voter rolls is absolutely a threat there because of it can be misused. It builds distrust for people. Okay. And when we point this stuff out, especially on the House floor, the majority leader, your buddy Mark Corman there, and look, Mark's a really nice guy.
He actually is. I've gotten to know him. He's a very nice guy.
But he'll normally say that we're dabbling in conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And the problem is the conspiracy theorists have literally had a pretty good track record of late. It's just problematic and it's not right. But this isn't that like really what the problem really is in today's policies. So much of this stuff is not really a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a right versus wrong issue. Right. And sometimes it's a good versus evil.
That is a great note on which to end.
For sure.
I think if anybody picked a final word, I think that's the right one.
Well, I appreciate you all having me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate. And thank you very much for Nicole as well.
Absolutely. Thanks a bunch, Ben.
Thanks.